はい、皆さんこんにちは。
Hello everyone, I am Hideo Kojima, director of various games from Snatchstronauts to the first two parts of Metal Gear 5. Part 3's release date yet to be announced. Today, I was originally planning to show off the newest trailer for Death Stranding 2. Unfortunately, upon going to show my new trailer to my best friend and favorite gaming content creator, Cole the Fact Guy, I unfortunately came to a sad realization. You see, Cole has made 2 videos on fellow popular director Suda51, and while this would seem like a good thing, I felt very betrayed, as he told me personally he was going to make a Metal Gear video first. My tears were immense, until he finally promised me that he'd make it up to me by talking about my favorite Metal Gear game that I have ever made, and the superior version of the first Metal Gear Solid, known as the Twin Snakes by some fans today. So Cole, I'd like to pass it on to you and your amazing video making skills. Thank you, Kojima-san. Wow, it really is an honor that the Hideo Kojima would want me to cover his game. So of course, I'll happily oblige. Though, to be fair, it was only a matter of time before I talked about Metal Gear because I have absolutely fallen head over heels for it in recent years. I started playing at the beginning of 2023, and I can't believe what an empty life I was living without these games in it. They are all just completely impervious to aging, with gameplay that is still some of the best in the genre. Seriously, you can pop in Metal Gear Solid 2 or 3 right now, and outside of like, oh, the square button shoots instead of the R button, they still play like they could have come out today. And Metal Gear Solid 5, the most modern game in the series, is just that same gameplay style refined to a perfect sheen. Not to mention, I honestly adore its story, completely unironically. I tend to be able to get into stories that are completely nuts over the ones that are just okay with nothing crazy memorable. And these stories are juggling government conspiracies, family ties and trauma, the place of soldiers in the world, AI, the idea of a massive shadow group controlling everything from behind the scenes, and yet because it's presented in a manner as insane as its subjects, and also tells it through genuinely lovable and fascinating characters, it always keeps me engaged. I refuse to skip any of these cutscenes, whether it's on a replay or my first run through. And that means a lot coming from an impatient idiot like me. Some of these cutscenes can be up to half an hour long, even more in Metal Gear 4's case. It is a great example of how Kojima likes to tell his stories, tied together with incredible gameplay, and if you haven't played it yet, sorry to break it to you, but you're a fucking asshole. To be honest, I thought my first dance with the series on this channel would have something to do with the story, as like I said, I adore it, and especially its characters. Maybe an analysis on Raiden or Otacon, that's what I planned. But I thought back to a couple conversations I had with a buddy of mine when I first started the series 2 years ago. Dante, my friend who I mentioned in the first No More Heroes video, is a massive Kojima fan, and an even bigger Metal Gear fan. And when I told him I was giving the series a try, he told me to have fun, to be patient with its story, and absolutely under no circumstance was I to play the remake of Metal Gear Solid 1, the Twin Snakes. Now, I was personally debating on which one I would play first, and I can't say I'm shocked that Dante said that, as he tends to be kind of a purist when it comes to remakes. And also, he's not the only one in this case. People tend to be pretty mixed on this remake, many saying it's just straight up bad. So, being the mature one, and one to respect the wishes of friends, I said fuck it and played the Twin Snakes instead, suck my toes. Now, to be fair, I've since played the original, and the rest of the series up to 4, and it's a great game. All of these are great games, but I have to say, especially with most of the series under my belt, I kind of vastly prefer Twin Snakes in literally every way. Don't get me wrong, I can see why people dislike it, why they prefer the original, but for me, this game is so much fun in every way. I think it fits more in with the rest of the series than the original does now. I think the visuals make it fit better, and I overall think with the context of the whole series, the game doesn't feel out of place at all. And look, I don't expect to change the whole fanbase's opinion here by any means. And if you still hate it, that's fine, and you are free to simply go fuck yourself. But the main point here, besides me wanting to gush, is to not need to explain myself down the line. This ain't gonna be a Sonic Frontiers where I mention it in passing and chuckle at people squirming at a short opinion I gave. This is going to be a full video. Hopefully not more than like 15 minutes because God, these are all getting too long. Where I tell you exactly why the Twin Snakes is a more than worthy remake of Metal Gear Solid 1. Now, first off, you might wonder, did Metal Gear Solid 1 even ever need a remake? And I would answer, probably not. The game is still exceptionally good today, with none of the mechanics aging in any way since. It's still a prime example of a fantastic stealth game. However, I would say it has one little tiny issue, and that it came out before Metal Gear Solid 2. 2 didn't reinvent the wheel, but what it did do was fully solidify what MGS gameplay is. It didn't change anything necessarily, only added new options for each encounter gameplay-wise. Visually, it fully established the series' visual identity, even more than the first game, I would argue, and that visual identity was kept throughout the series going forward. And story-wise, oh yeah, it established what the series was more than basically any other game in the series. I'm not going to go too deep into the actual story here today, as it's a video for another time, but suffice to say, where one story was plenty complex with many character motives and different organizations all clashing and reveals happening frequently, 2 was where it sat you down and truly emphasized that you were on Hideo Kojima's wild ride. Now, whether you engage with that is up to you. Personally, I really loved how MGS2's story went from a simple sneaking mission to a massive conspiracy surrounding simulations and the Patriots, while the main focus always stayed on how this affects the characters involved, especially Raiden. But even more than the complexity, the way the story was told became a lot more over the top outside of Kodak. A lot more badass action scenes of characters fighting. Hell, I think one of the most memorable images from 2 is Raiden leaning against a rocket launcher after blowing up 10 Metal Gear Rays. Its cutscenes were a lot crazier, something continued into future games like 3 and 4, and I'll definitely get into that later, but the point is, this game sets out not to fix MGS1, but to simply bring it in line with what the series had become and would continue to be, from both gameplay and presentation. So while no, Metal Gear Solid 1 didn't need a remake, I see it as adding the things in gameplay the game kind of feels like it was missing. And in terms of presentation, bringing it closer to the modern series at the time, specifically Metal Gear Solid 2. So cracking into that gameplay first, what exactly did this game change? Well, in truth, similar to 2, not much. The game keeps the same layout as the original game with the same overall gameplay structure. Your focus is still sneaking around Shadow Moses, collecting weapons and getting to new areas. It's just now you have the new mechanics added into Sons of Liberty. As I stated before, Metal Gear Solid 2 simply added and refined to what the first game had, and this game takes those mechanics and gives them to you in Metal Gear Solid 1. Now, do some of these snap the game in half? They can, and we'll touch on that. But first, I want to talk about how they change and improve the game outside of it. First off, you can hang off ledges now. You'll never be required to, but it's always something you can do where in the original you just couldn't. What's funny is this isn't an insane change by any means. It just feels right though. Whenever I play the original game, I tend to need to remind myself that I just can't do that. Snake's arms are too angular in this game, you see, and his hands can't animate, so he has to crawl or something instead. But here, his arms and fingers are fully animated, so it's no issue whatsoever, and can not only aid in sneaking, but also get you to certain places faster as you can drop down without issue. Along with this, you can now aim guns and shoot in the first-person view. See, when not shooting in first-person view, it's not awful, it just feels kind of clunky. The auto lock-on doesn't really exist, and if an enemy ducks, well, I guess I'm waiting for him to stand up so I can shoot him. I can't aim downwards, these stiff polygonal arms you see. But this gives you a new advantage in combat. Does it make combat a new end-all be-all? Not at all. Sneaking is still the optimal way to play, and it's how you're going to want to go about things most of the time. But when the game forces you into combat scenarios, or when you just fuck up and need to take out a couple enemies quickly, this is a godsend. This is a very me thing, but in the original, the reason I didn't ever want to get into fights was never because you were so harshly punished by getting caught and would need to run away. It was because the combat in the game felt like a nightmare sometimes. You could argue it's on purpose, but the game makes you fight people a lot, and it just makes it an inconvenience. The shooting isn't precise at all. It's great for the nerves, but horrible for actual force encounters. Here, you still have a feeling of combat always being the worst option, but when you have to fight, you now have more options. You have a more precise way to take out enemies, but it also takes you more time than just spraying and praying. And I think that's what they were aiming for when developing this system for MGS2. It doesn't make combat ideal, but it does make it so it's not a total nightmare. Not to mention the smaller things, like being able to peek corners with guns and oh, okay, yeah, I guess we should talk about that thing. See, the things I've mentioned do truly make the game easier, but it's not as simple as, it's easy now. But this weapon absolutely does make the game much, much easier and not in the same way. The tranquilizer gun. Introduced in Metal Gear Solid 2, not only is it incredibly iconic to Metal Gear, it's also probably my favorite weapon in the series. The ability to knock people out from a distance is so valuable, along with it making next to no sound. It encourages non-lethal takedowns the same way sneaking does. The original Solid didn't have it. It made sense because you couldn't aim very accurately outside of sniper rifles and Nikitas, and something like this requires you to hide and aim precisely or you could end up accidentally alerting someone. They added it in here, and I'll be honest, the better aiming, the new sneaking mechanics, none of them break the game. But this does. The game wasn't designed with this weapon in mind originally, and to be honest, this game does hide it from you. It's very optional, and when I first played it, I didn't end up using it. But here, it's a complete room clearer. Most rooms have no punishment for knocking out an enemy with this thing, as enemies are spread far apart, so taking out one doesn't alert anyone. And if you've got good aim, you can land frequent headshots with it. That's it. That's the room done, and probably more, all without needing to leave that comfortable hiding spot. This is an issue I don't have an answer for necessarily because, I'll be honest, it can mess with something I think this game annihilates the original in terms of, which is immersion and choice. One thing that I adore about the Metal Gear series is that despite most of them being exceptionally linear due to how the story needs to progress, the way you tackle every problem is incredibly non-linear. Yes, there's the obvious. You either sneak by or shoot the enemies quickly enough to avoid reinforcements. But then there's just how many ways you can go about doing either of those. You can try to stay under cover at all times, or you could try to isolate enemies for a quick neck snap, or you could try to keep constantly moving using a box. You could try to avoid the cameras, or use a chaff grenade to disable them while losing your own radar. Each little room has so many ways of tackling them, and Twin Snakes makes it easier by giving you those extra moves, yes, but it does so by giving you more ways to tackle each area. In the original, you have options, but they tend to boil down into either staying completely out of sight or getting rid of the enemies since corpses disappear. Here, even if you decide to just snap every neck or knock everyone out, the game also has an answer by making bodies stay put. You have to move them out of sight to guarantee nobody will find them, meaning you have even more to consider when going through each challenge. Except, none of this applies to that damn trank gun. Worried about a body you put to sleep being seen? Nah, just put the other guy to sleep too. In MGS 2 and 3, it's legitimately pretty hard to only rely on the tranquilizer, but because these rooms tend to be more open with enemies being a lot fewer due to the limited options of the original, this thing is always the correct answer. Yes, ammo for it can be sparse. In fact, I've run out of it a few times, but you have more than enough to get past every challenge, and that is pretty lame, because I can defend every other new aspect of the game, and hell, I haven't even mentioned some of the big ones just yet. But this, unfortunately, while it can be very fun, is a miss, and it feels a bit backwards. The new options don't just make the game easier, they simply give you more ways to sneak around. It really immerses you as this master soldier who can sneak out of any situation. But this one gun kind of just takes you out of that and makes you go, oh yeah, this is a video game, I better use the best weapon. Here's what I would do to fix it. Just make it a completion reward, simple as that. Seriously, make it like the infinite ammo bandana or the tuxedo, and make it so once you've beaten the game, you can run through it with this crazy good weapon for a better rank. And I'll say it right now, as much as I bitched, for one, it's very fun to use, and two, again, it's optional. And if you don't use it, unironically gameplay-wise, you just have Metal Gear 1 with all of the improvements of 2, and that's great. And it doesn't even stop there. The most annoying parts of the first game have been addressed here, mostly. Near the end of the game, there's a part where you have to run in circles to change the temperature of a keycard, but here, if you just hang down at a certain point and use first-person shooting, you can change it in the same room. That's genius, using the game's new mechanics in order to change something nobody liked in the original. I also think they improved the boss fights, even if they still aren't perfect. I'll be real, I don't really think that Metal Gear Solid got bosses right until 2 and especially 3, but Twin Snakes does improve on what the original had. The first Ocelot fight is easier but feels a lot more immersive and realistic, as yes, if you're in a gunfight, you won't just be chasing someone until you're behind them, you'll be hiding behind cover, taking shots frequently, and it goes from a basic chase to an actual shootout. Psycho Mantis is mostly the same, except for if you aim in first person, he'll start fucking with the camera, something I'm sure he did in the original, but I don't really use first person mode against him there. But here, it feels like he's taking advantage of something you thought you had and stealing it. The second fight with Vulcan Raven is much better if you ask me. You have a much better idea of where he is at any given time and can be more strategic thanks to the first person shooting, but it also doesn't break the fight. It's still challenging and still requires good positioning and movement. It feels more like just adding in that little bit that the original fight could have used. And then the fights that were originally great, those for me being Sniper Wolf, the Hind D, and Metal Gear Rex, are all pretty much unchanged. Still very fun with nothing nothing completely different because nothing needed any changing. If anything, they're just improved due to the cleaner, less fuzzy visuals. So besides that one gun that I went on a way too long rant about, without a shadow of a doubt, this is my preferred way to play Metal Gear Solid 1. The first Solid game is still very good gameplay-wise, but when I play, I always feel like I'm missing those couple of things that 2 introduced. Am I biased? Yes. Not only have I played the Twin Snakes more, but 2 is my favorite game in the series. Of course I'm gonna love it if a game plays like it, but I don't think it's outrageous to miss those options when I go back to 1 and now I don't need to. I can enjoy the mechanics that I get used to in future games while still experiencing the environments and enemies from the original game, and I think that this alone makes Twin Snakes a better game. However, this is just one of the things I think this game really nailed. Obviously, as you can tell by looking at it, this game is pretty great visually, although I do also legitimately love the way the original game looked, as at this point not only are its visuals iconic, but they really use the limitations that the PlayStation had to its benefit. The game's rougher visuals sell the tone, while the blocky faces also add to the game's tongue-in-cheek nature. There's something about those visuals that also sell how brutal the conditions of Shadow Moses are. Just looking at the outside really puts in you how freezing cold the entire base has to be at all times, and still manages to show how sterile everything inside is. However, I also think this remake does it more than enough justice. You still get that sterile feeling in every area. The idea that everything here is so top secret that just walking through could get a normal person shot for learning what color the trimming on the walls are. I think what it also emphasizes more than just the harsh environment is how quiet everything is. It's a stealth mission after all, so these more detailed spaces really push how large the environment is while also showing how despite all that's going on, the only thing you hear most of the time is the pounding wind on the walls. Plus, it still feels like Metal Gear Solid 1. I mean, just look at the codec conversations. They kept those iconic images instead of making it MGS2 style. I love that. Now, I will say, yes, it's pretty obvious. I did mod the game for visual purposes. Just a full screen mod and a texture pack. I mean, fuck, if they're not going to remaster the game, the fans will do it themselves. But I don't really think the mods change what I'm saying. The game already looked great. This just pushes the resolution a bit farther and keeps everything looking as good as it did back in the day. Speaking of looking, this sounds weird, but you can actually see everything now. Look, the original game style is iconic, but the heavy pixelation can make a lot of it look fuzzy in gameplay, and for me, clean visuals are extremely necessary in a game like this, as I need to observe my environment in order to plan my route, and in the original, sometimes things just got lost in its visuals. Here, because the visuals were brought up to the quality of 2 and 3, games where visual clarity is also very important that tend to use techniques to make enemies stick out, everything is just a lot more visually distinct, which helps in puzzle solving and strategy. And those more atmospheric or weird areas are emphasized even more. The way the colors pop so much more in this game with the whites and grays make the room with all the fucking lava really stick out. It also makes rooms like the lobby area feel even more out of place and help you see how this place probably was before the terrorist attack. You can see mouths moving cutscenes now, and the character faces also emote. Not only that, but this game brings the cutscenes up to the standards of MGS2 in terms of motion capture and quality and okay, here we go. This is a major problem people have with this game. Probably the main problem. Yeah, the gameplay's easier, but it's still Metal Gear Solid. It's still really good. No, what most people really hate is the way this game presents its cutscenes. See, the original game for a PS1 game had a lot of cutscenes. That was impressive on its own, but things also happened in those cutscenes. That was crazy. But by the time we get to Metal Gear Solid 2, it's no contest. Games just had better cutscene quality, and Metal Gear Solid was still at the top of that in terms of production value. So it absolutely makes sense to want to remake this game to bring its cutscenes to that level. However, this game takes a game whose cutscenes could be wild, but still, you know, mostly like this, and just fucking goes nuts with them. Characters are constantly doing flips and shit for no reason. It takes a game about a hardened soldier sneaking into a military base and turns it into the goddamn Matrix. There's fucking airplane sounds everywhere. Gray Fox moves his wrist slightly and cuts down a ceiling. And then when it falls, he kicks it at Snake and Snake goes... When Snake rides on a car and sees bullets, he goes... Snake gets told that the Armstead CEO can't remember a phone number, and this is his reaction. It is absolutely ridiculous. Constant off-the-wall action with no concern for realism or, honestly, even keeping with the tone. Snake gets told he's gonna die of a new disease at some random point, and his brother clone dies right in front of him and is desperately clinging to life, and he just goes, but you can tell him that you don't know information and he will fucking kill you. But if you're on fire, he'll just do this. It is so hilarious, so out of left field, and you know what? I adore it. Unabashedly, without a single hint of irony or lying. I love this so much. And let me just say, I get it. I completely get why people might hate this. Metal Gear Solid 1 is silly, yes, but people take it seriously. People connect with this story and with these characters. So to see it turned into such a nutty action flick has to be jarring. But hear me out. I take these games serious too. I absolutely engage with the stories no matter how crazy they get. But that's the thing. They're crazy. And they treat it as such. Seriously, while yes, this game is the most over the top in the series, the other games aren't that much more toned down. Remember when Ocelot gets possessed through his arm and acts like this?
So young anymore, eh, Snake? You're drowning in time. I know what it's like, brother.
Remember the guy on roller skates who plants bombs? Remember Fortune?
Come.
Remember when the Pain summoned bees by bussing it down sexual style? Remember Vulcan?
Who are you?
Remember when Ocelot spent a full minute spinning his guns? Remember this? Metal Gear is ridiculous. It has always been over the top and silly, but it still can take itself seriously when it needs to. It's why I see a man in a Dr. Octopus suit jumping on giant futuristic mechs, killing them with a machine gun, and clap and chuckle, while also genuinely feeling something when he dies, reaching up to a George Washington statue, but failing to get high enough as he dies. It balances some of the most ridiculous shit and characters you will ever see, while still managing to get you to take it seriously. And this game just catches itself up to those games in my eyes. And look, it's not perfect, okay? I personally don't like how they handled Snake in certain scenes. In his scenes with the DARPA chief, he talks to him how you would expect, but then with the Armstead president, you've got the scene where he threatens to shoot him for not knowing a codec number. And that's just the start of him being weirdly mean when people don't have info he wants. And that hits hardest for me with Otacon. Now, I'll explain my bias. I adore Otacon. He's probably my favorite character in the whole series, and his friendship with Snake is great. But here, Snake is just kind of a prick to him all the time. And yeah, they aren't besties just yet, and by the end of the game, they've got that strong relationship that I love, but when they first meet, he tries to strangle him. Actually, while editing, I went back and checked. He does this in the original too. Then when he brings him food in prison, when Otacon can't get him out, he strangles him. And then after their friendship has been solidified, after they've grown to trust one another deeply, Snake lets Otacon fall and die. If there were only one of these scenes, that'd be one thing, but it is most frequent with Otacon. Psycho Mantis tries to make Meryl shoot herself, and yet Snake still respects him in death. Sniper Wolf almost completely cripples Meryl and takes part in his torture, yet he lets her die peacefully. Same with Vulcan Raven, but Otacon, the most helpful guy here, give me that motherfucker, I'm gonna choke the lights out, I'm gonna... It's funny, don't get me wrong, but this game actually does handle the character drama excellently, just as well as the original game, so this one thing is the sticking point for me. However, the higher focus on action does aid with two characters in particular. The first being Gray Fox. Gray Fox in the original game is pretty sick. He's a man forcibly turned into a cyborg ninja who wants one final fight with Snake before he dies. And he goes out aiding Snake to take down Metal Gear. But here, he fully gets the justice he deserves. He is fucking nuts. He moves super fast. He cuts shit without moving his hand. He never sits still, like his body has so much energy he can't control it. And when he does lose control, the more exaggerated action really shows how agonizing it must be. And his final moments are perfect. He goes out in this insane fireworks spectacle that really wouldn't be matched until Rising. It shows how insanely adept he is with his new body, but also how desperate the fight is. And when he finally gets taken out, it feels like you just watched an all-out war. Without the exaggerated action, I feel like this moment doesn't hit as hard, and also doesn't portray Gray Fox as the insane monster of a machine he is now. That's the tragedy of Gray Fox. His only use was for battle, so now the way he fights is even more extreme than the shit Snake can pull off. But there isn't a single character who deserves this game's over-the-top action and character movement more than Liquid Snake. Liquid Snake is not a human. The way he talks, the way he acts, he is on a different plane than literally everyone else around him. If everyone in the room has their attitudes and excitement sitting at a 5, his will be at an 11. And if something goes down, he'll be at a 20. This is not a dig at his actor Cam Clark, as I adore this performance.
Man who stole the light from my life. Because of you! So, the snake's finally come out of his hole. Are you ready now, my brother? I'm you! I'm your shadow! What? Isn't that reason enough for warriors such as us? Snake, did you like my sunglasses? What?
It's iconic for a reason, and the fact that 2 literally brought back Liquid, basically just to have him give his speeches again through an arm, is proof of how perfect he is. But there was one issue. His form was limited. He was forcibly contained by the limited graphics of the PS1, and therefore, it always felt like his movements never quite matched his performance. Here though, we've got it. Liquid is a character that would stand in front of fire while changing poses. Liquid is absolutely a character that would jump on top of a railing during the middle of a conversation, then backflip into a nuclear war machine. It feels like this game is as extreme as it is in order to match Liquid's raw energy at all times, and by God, they did it. Again, no irony. This alone justifies this game's insane action to me, without question. Because as nutty as it is to have Snake doing wacko shit and dodging bullets, it's all worth it just to have Liquid going crazy. And what's perfect is that Liquid only ever does as much as he needs to. He never does 80 cartwheels just because, and every extreme movement he does is perfect. If MGS1 ever got another remake, you could tone down some of this stuff. Fine, I'll swallow it. But if Liquid isn't as extreme as he is here, even by 1%, you have failed. Utterly. I will take all of this wild shit that the game pulls, just to keep that absolutely perfect confrontation with Liquid. And this is where the Matrix style actually does nothing but enhance it. That fist fight with Liquid is just whee! Boom! And it works because they're clones. Of course they'd be doing the same moves at each other. And it goes from silly to just plain sick. And that's how I'd shrink all of what I've said about the presentation down. You could say, oh, it's too over the top. It's too silly. I don't like it. Wah, wah, wah. And I'll just respond, yeah, it's awesome. And my least favorite part of this game's story is also a bit improved. I don't really like Snake's relationship with Meryl, especially in the context of the rest of the series, where they're not really a couple or even an option for a couple. But the over-the-top camera angles and character movements make the soap opera romance feel like a hilarious soap opera. It's way more entertaining this way, and I will take this over the more sterile conversations of the first game any day. Maybe I can engage with Metal Gear's silliness a little too easily, but come on. Come on. This shit is awesome. And if you can't handle it, then fine. Go and shit your pants. But these cutscenes are either straight up cooking or are so funny that I fall in love. Like, dude, the game had a dude shooting a raven out of his head. Snake doing this isn't crazy at all. Also, I like how much it sells its stupidity. In the original, Snake killed a tank using only grenades. Kinda weird. But then this game goes, yeah, he did. Then he hucks one through the cannon. And when the guy is on fire, he bops him one and walks off. The game is amazing. I don't want to hear any of your garbage. But you want to know what's extra sad? It's what I said earlier. I had to remaster this game using fan mods because Konami has just refused to touch it. It's not even like it's not a Kojima NGS game. It is. Yeah, he didn't direct the cutscenes, but he was still involved. This was still his game. Not that Konami really cares about using his games to do whatever they want without any of his input, but I digress. This game, like it or not, is stuck on the GameCube, and the only reasonable way to play it is through emulation because its price is only going up. I got a copy years ago before even playing the series, basically as a collection piece, because I had a feeling the price would shoot up eventually, and I knew I was eventually going to want to play this series. It's sad. really, because even if some people hate it, I don't think it's fair to call this a bad game. It's still really good. It still hasn't aged a day, and its gameplay is fantastic. But it's what I talked about in the Nintendo video. Konami would rather only release the PS1 game over and over and not touch its remake. Hell, they probably want to remake it again without Kojima's say, and that's really, really lame. A game of this quality shouldn't be stuck on hardware most people don't have anymore, at a price most people won't pay. I think it should be available just as easily as the OG game is. Same with games like 4. The fact that Konami has been so weirdly stingy with the Metal Gear series before the last year or so is really stupid, and it makes me sad that even when the other games get re-released again, this one's probably gonna stay forgotten. And no matter how you feel about this game, whether you prefer the original or not, you should care about people being able to play it on modern platforms. And you absolutely should play it. It has a couple hiccups, and its presentation might seem extreme, but if you're like me and enjoy the series for both its serious storytelling along with its silly moments, you'll probably absolutely love it. And even just as a new way to re-experience the first Solid game, which was already great, just with a few new toys to play with, it is absolutely worth your time. It's wonderful. It's my preferred way to play MGS1 by a mile, and more people besides me need to celebrate it because it is absolutely part of the Metal Gear legacy. And like, come on, are we really choosing to forget this game over the Acid series? Like, come on, this game is fantastic, and yet because Snake does a backflip, it's bad? Is that it? You're really gonna cry? You're gonna cry, little baby, little piss baby? Crying piss baby gonna pee. Well, Kojima, I hope I help you feel better. As your favorite YouTuber, I would hate to disappoint you. So, as I'm never coming back, I'll send it back to you, Kojima. Thank you, Cole, my favorite person in real life. I'm glad you can make a video on my favorite Metal Gear game, and I hope you get even less views this time than the last one. Now for my Death Stranding 2 trailer.